Hi, Blair. So good to see you. Welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you, Ken, for having me.
Yes, I just mentioned to you, and right before we came on, I heard you speaking on some other podcasts. I was really excited to get you on here. I think we speak a lot of the same language, and I think you're going to give us a great education on kind of managing or leading in current times. But before we get into the book, Punks and Suits, I want to talk about your early career and maybe early life if you want to, wherever you want to start. Introduce yourself to me and to the audience if you could.
Yeah, well, how far back to go? I mean, I'm a child of the 70s. I was
Yeah.
born in 1970. So my formative years, formative experiences were in a world that's really different to the world we have today. And here in the UK, the 70s were a time of a lot of industrial action, a lot of strikes, power cuts, um, lots of unrest, riots, that kind of thing. And although I was a kid, I suspect that that kind of influenced me, industrial action and kind of the impact on business on everyday life probably was something that formed me as it forms, those early experiences form each generation.
Right.
So my generation, the Gen X's, we were formed by that. Um, but, as a kid, I just wanted to be, well, I wanted to be an actress, really. I wanted to get on the stage and perform. And it led me actually into journalism, so broadcast journalism. So that is my background. I worked for about 10 years for the BBC here in the UK. On one of the biggest news programs in the country called Today, which broadcasts every day to about 6 million listeners here. So about 1 in 10 people in the country are tuning into that. Um, but it's funny. I was talking to my daughter this morning. She's taking some quite important exams. She's 16 years old, and she was nervous, as you would be before each exam. And I said, it's funny that each of the experiences that we have, if we allow those experiences to guide us, we end up putting them all together at some point later on in a way that no one else can do. So,
Sure.
if we take that kind of those early experiences as a kid and then wanting to be an actor and then becoming a journalist, I read law at university, so I've got that kind of in the background, and then training as a coach in the early 2000s and coaching leaders. And now I write and speak about leadership. And it wouldn't have been possible for me to do that without any of those early
Without each of
experiences.
those
So,
things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Do you think there's a part of I had aspirations, I think, of going into journalism as well and wrote for like my high school paper and stuff like that. But at its best, I guess, or when people have the best intentions going into journalism, is it is it I want to ask it as a question more as what I
Yeah.
was thinking, but is it, you're growing up in the 70s. We're similar age, by the way, so I grew up in the 70s as well. There's a lot of change happening, right? You got the Vietnam War when we were kids. You've got equal rights. You've got all kinds of things happening, and in the States, you just coming out of the race riots and everything else, right? And did journalism become kind of this crossroads of maybe wanting to be on stage in a way, right? Having a voice combined with maybe the influences of your youth, which was all of this, I don't know, injustice or need to maybe talk about things and not sit in the background.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make you political. There are lots
Mhm.
of people of our age who are not political at
Sure.
all. But it can do because it's right there in your life. I remember my family in the late 70s, there were lots of power cuts because the workers were on strike. The workers running the power plants were on strike, and therefore there was no power. And so we would sit with a candle, and playing board games on the floor and card games because there was no electricity
Sure.
for 3 days a week. Yeah, for sure that it's influential. I mean, I don't want to say I was so high-minded.
Mhm.
I wanted to be an actor. My parents did not want me to do that. And so they wanted me to have a profession, and they wanted me to do something where I would be making a difference. And so, you know, you take the bit of the performance, the performer in you, and you look for something that's an outlet for that. And going into broadcasting was an outlet for that, but with something that makes a difference, and that is a profession. So, but you know, you mentioned at its best, and I think unfortunately, my experience wasn't necessarily journalism at its best. At its best, you know, the BBC has a wonderful reputation around the world, and it does do some incredible journalism. But on a show like I was on, you know, the longest interview that you'll do on that show is 8 minutes. Most interviews are 3 minutes. So that's one or two questions that the presenter gets to ask the guest to try to tell the story behind the headline. And what those shows are really interested in is getting a nice clip that they can then play on the news bulletins for the rest of the day of someone saying something that they shouldn't have said, or out of context, it sounds very bad. And I started to feel like we're not really telling the story. What we're doing here is we're getting two crazy people on extreme ends of a story, and we're getting them to battle it out for 3, 5, or 8 minutes, and we're calling that news. And that is not the story. The story is normally the people in the center disagreeing about subtle differences that make all the difference. But that doesn't make a great 3 minutes of radio. So we never told those stories. So in the end, I became quite disillusioned.
Sure. You don't see a lot of stories about compromise or, mindful negotiation or anything like that, right?
That's right. That's right. And one thing drives the other. So because that's the way the media works, that ends up being the way that politics is, and vice versa.
And it's gotten so much, so much more, even since how long have you been out of?
Oh, yeah, 25 years. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there was no social media at all. And we were just starting to use the internet really in the sort of late 90s. So absolutely, it's got worse. And you know, politicians know full well, and their teams know how to use that social media. And of course, we've got the echo chambers and all of that. So yeah, the divisions in our society are very, very deep, particularly in countries, European countries and countries like the States, where there's a report that comes out every year called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which measures levels of trust in institutions, in the media, and governments, and business leaders. And countries like the UK and the United States are right at the bottom of that league table. We do not trust leaders. We do not trust institutions. We do not trust the sources of information like media, mass media, mainstream media, social media, and we don't trust each other as a result. It's very dangerous.
That's rough. What was it, that realization that made you pivot into leadership, or was that an immediate thing, or was it more like I'm fed up and I'm going to leave and I'm going to go decide what I'm going to do later? Or was it a conscious, like, I'm going to take what I've learned and pivot into this new direction?
Yeah. Well, at the time, what I thought I was going to do was be a life coach. Because that was what everyone was doing. It was life coaching in the late 90s. That was the thing. And I thought I'll do that. A complete career change, run my own business. I'd never done that before. I don't come from a family of business people. So it's all brand new. And I was 29 years old. So I was pretty young, 29, 30 years old, to be starting on a second career, especially running your own business. But within a few months, I attracted to my practice a few leaders who wanted to talk more about their leadership than their lives. I mean, it's all integrated, obviously, but they were interested in that. And I loved working with them. My life coaching clients thought, I think, that having a life coach is the thing that would change their life. I don't think a lot of them realized they would have to do something different.
Sure, yeah.
Whereas my leadership clients understood that the coaching session was an opportunity to think aloud, and then they would go and take action. And then they'd come back the next week and they'd say, right, I did that. And we'd be able to break it apart and see how it went and what would they do next and all of that. And I thought that was those were my people. So very early on, I started to specialize and gain some real insight into the world of business and the leadership mindset.
I've worked with similar individuals. It's a lot more fulfilling, right? Because you feel like, I know they tell us as coaches, like, not to get too attached to the outcomes, but I am. I mean, I'm invested, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and I want to see progress. I want people to get value for their time and their money. And I just want to see wins, whatever that is, whether that's having better relationships or doing better at work or whatever. So where does the business go from there? From how do you get into, I mean, I don't want to fast forward too far, but becoming an author and all of that.
Yeah. So I was still writing a bit about leadership. I think, when you start your own business, so I got some really good advice. I was asking a more experienced coach about marketing, and there's all sorts of ways you can market your business, obviously. And she said, when are you at your best? And I said, well, I'm at my best when I'm addressing an audience. I'm at my best when I'm writing, and I'm at my best when I'm having sort of one-to-one or small group conversations. And she said, okay, so build your marketing strategy around that. Don't do the things that you don't enjoy doing just because everyone else is doing them. So I went to business networking events in the morning, got to know people really, really well. I reached out to journalists and started writing features for newspapers and being on the radio and things. And I would give small talks, right, to small audiences. And then after a few years, I thought I could write a book. I had an idea. It was the first book was called The Hyper Creative Personality. And I sent the synopsis. I mean, these were the days where you printed out 30 copies of the synopsis and you put it in 30 envelopes and you sent 30 letters in the post to 30 literary agents.
Mm.
And you waited for them to write back or call you.
Hopefully, right.
And a few agents did call me, and so I got representation, and then they got me my first book deal. So that was probably, I think, 2000 and I can't remember when that book came out, maybe 2010, something like that. So the first 10 years I was gaining experience and I was doing a bit of writing about it. And then I had my first book published. So then I started to shift from being a pure coach. As a coach, you're not supposed to bring an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But after 10 years, I felt like I actually have some cool insights for people. And instead of wasting time with them trying to work some stuff out, I could share what I've learned, what I've seen. Detached, wherever they want to take that, if they reject it and come up with something else, that's fine. But I started to realize I have a position. I take a position on some of these things that I think is right or wrong. And that is where, over the next 15 years, my ideas started to crystallize. And what I realized, and particularly in the last 6 to 8 years, when I've been a professional keynote speaker, and as a professional keynote speaker, you have to have a position. I mean, there's no point going on stage otherwise. So as I started to pivot into being a speaker at conferences and events, speaking to audiences of leaders, I realized that most of the conventional literature about leadership is theoretical. It's written by people who do not work with real leaders day after day, year after year, who do not lead real change programs in organizations, who do not run leadership programs for actual leaders. Because when you try to implement those ideas, they don't work.
Right.
So they look great on a academic paper, they look great in the Harvard Business Review, but you try to actually implement them and they don't work because it's not the reality of a leader's world. And so I started to develop my own theories based on actual work with actual leaders, working in collaboration with them, trying to solve problems in their businesses. And that has resulted most recently in Punks in Suits, which is me basically saying, you know, we're not in the, I mean, this is obvious, but we're not in the industrial age anymore, yet we still run our businesses in very similar ways to the ways we have done for the last 250 years. And we still treat people, we dress it up as, oh no, it's not command and control. We, really interested in engagement. We really want to empower, but actually we don't fully embrace that. We still treat people like cogs in the machine, like we can expect relentless productivity from them, like they are expected to make no mistakes, to be efficient, to follow processes and systems, to ultimately do what they're told by more senior people, to keep their emotion out of the organization, out of work. And I think particularly with the coming of AI, we have to massively rethink how we're going to use people, because AI is going to do most of what we've had people doing up until now. So it is we're at a massive crossroads right now.
Would you say, I mean, as you're saying that, and like I mentioned, I heard you on another podcast recently, and you talked about, and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, but sort of, if we're treating people like cogs in a machine, right? And let's say someone's duties as that cog in the machine is to, I don't know, process customer service requests or something that could obviously be taken over by AI if it hasn't already. And you said, look, not only can it be taken over, it can be taken over better, right? Because there is no emotion and there is no, it's sort of like you're a second class machine doing a machine's job, I think was your term, which I really resonated with me. So then it's, what do you do with that person? And this probably comes back to the leadership part, is what do you do with that human capital, that person that you have that you're used to running as a production machine, and now that person has to become a thought machine, kind of, right? I certainly, and not just how do you have to act differently as their leader, but how did they have to act differently? I mean, I have to imagine a large percentage of our workforce, even though their soul probably wants more than what they've been getting from leadership so far, they're still geared towards tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? If that's the pattern you've been running for a long time. So I guess it's a big question that might have other questions underneath it, but what do leaders need to change to start transitioning workers out of this sort of industrial type leadership model and into a model that's going to work for today and in the future? And then what do the workers need to do?
Yeah. I mean, this is not going to be without huge pain.
Right.
Okay. So if we think about what happened in the Industrial Revolution, it was a big mess for a lot of people for a very long time. And ongoing, industries would thrive and then they would be replaced. My dad he was a civil servant and he used to have to write reports. And then he got a word processor. And so the way he used to do it was he would type up his notes. He would then dictate the notes onto a dictaphone. He would send the tape to the typing pool. The ladies there would type it up, send it back. He would read it, make annotations and changes. They would fix it, and then it would be lodged with, the department. And when he got a word processor, everybody in the typing pool was unnecessary.
Right.
Right. So I don't know what they went on to do. And there was no sense of responsibility towards those people by the organization. They were made redundant. Some of them would have been given new jobs, or they would have retrained or whatever, but a lot of them would have been made redundant and they would have had to find their own way. So I'm not necessarily saying that wonderful person in customer service can simply just do what they've never been asked to do before. Right. Not only at work, but in the whole education system. The whole culture of our world isn't really about people having original thoughts and original ideas and speaking their mind and bringing their emotion to situations in a productive way. We just don't have a world like that. Why? Because work isn't like that.
Right.
And so we've created a culture that will create the sorts of people that we've wanted in the workplace. Now we need different sorts of people in the workplace. We have to change our society's culture to get that, and starting right at the root with the education system, but also with shifting our perspective about what business is for. And I really think that business, work in general, is a force for good and can be a force for good in the world. And that unlike what happened in the Industrial Revolution and the multiple revolutions within that, we can't just say, sorry, we don't need you. It's not our fault, but we don't need you anymore. We have to say, we have some responsibility towards those people that we no longer need. We need to either create opportunities for them, or we need to work with government to help to retrain, but that makes it sound like retrain for a job. But I mean, retrain the way that they think and the way that they interact. Or we have to do something for our communities that are going to be devastated by us saying, sorry, we don't need you. So the big picture, that is very, very disruptive. On a sort of leader by leader basis, I think it is still possible right now to bring humanity into work.
Yes.
To look at all the things that we do that make it hard for people to be healthy humans and hard for them to do their best work, actually. All the ways that we create a command and control system, all the ways that we demonstrate we don't really trust people. We say we trust them, but we don't really let them think for themselves. And actually start to say, okay, what if I do treat you like I trust you? In other words, what if I assume that you have positive intent? Just start there.
Right.
What if I assume you want to do the best, rather than I assume you're trying to get away with something, which is, I think, ultimately a lot of people think, I can't trust that person because if I let them have freedom, they will take advantage of that. And I don't believe that's true. I've met thousands and thousands of people over my 25 years in this business. And I've never met a one that wasn't trying to do their very best.
I think people inherently want to win, right? And want to do a good job. I think that's sort of built into our DNA. I mean, we go south on it because we don't like our leader, or we're not inspired by our job, or we feel like someone's done us wrong. But I mean, in our core, it's not like we want to go from job to job and not do well, right? you know, my thoughts on if someone's in an individual contributor type role, a non-leadership role, I think, and I think AI is making this more obvious or moving this faster. But I think this has always been the case. Is I think the more versatile you can be, and the more things you can learn, obviously within your company, then the more you're going to add value. And it's like the utility player on a sports team. It's like, well, your position's been filled by somebody else, but we still, yeah, we can use you somewhere else, right? And I think we're trying to encourage people to do that. We just had, I guess, a combination of, it's hard to know exactly when to label something AI and when to just call it technology anymore, right? Like they're all intertwined. But we just took the process of about 12 different software programs that were being kind of manually run each day by people on our team, and one person specifically. And through a combination of technology and AI, we were able to automate all of that. It took us 2 or 3 months to build it, and we paid a consultant that knew how to do it and stuff like that. But at the end of it, this person who worked full time with us, that job no longer existed. But she's a great asset for us. She's a great person. She has stuck her foot in other other puddles of the business, and it was more like, okay, what do you want to do now? So for her, it was more of a relief because she was sort of trapped by this thing, and we knew it. We were like, how do we get you out of this? You're the only one that knows how to do it. You know what I mean? And so it was more about freedom. But I think on her side, again, it involved opening her eyes and adding more value where she could, so that when there was a shift, and there'll always be a shift, right? That she could take advantage of that. And then from our end, also creating a culture that allowed her to play in areas other than just the one that she was assigned, right? And to have thoughts and opinions about those things.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a brilliant example. And I think, you know, sometimes when I'm describing what I think is going to happen and what we need from leaders, someone will say, well, what about people who don't want to think for themselves? What about people who just want to be told what to do? I'm not sure that there's that many of them.
Right.
At heart, I think that because that's the most that some people have ever experienced at work,
Right.
they don't know what to do if they're
Right.
given more freedom. But I mean, most of these people have families. Most of them are making decisions about their lives all the time. They're operating in the world without being told what to do minute by minute. They have the capability, they're fully capable of change. People change their lives all the time. They get married and they start families and they buy a new house and they go somewhere different on holiday and they, people do change all the time. So this idea that people can't change, this idea that people need to be told what to do all the time, it's just lazy thinking.
Right.
And we can bring that. We finally have the opportunity for people to bring their whole selves to work. We don't have to make them fit a sort of puzzle piece of, I know you can do 5,000 things, but in this job, we only want you to do these three,
Right.
which is very disheartening to
Right.
see other opportunities, other ways that you could help. But you're not invited to the table because you do these three things. Thank you very much. And I think that if we can start seeing people as, and this is where AI can help, right? Because in the past, it's been really hard to understand what someone could offer to an organization because you've got their CV, you've seen their qualifications or their experience or whatever. And so a human analyzes that data and says, oh, this would be a good next step for you. Or you do the same. You look at it through the same lens. Whereas AI, if we could input into an HR type AI, not just our qualifications and experiences, but our hopes and dreams, our values, our personality quirks, some of the stuff we've got going on outside of work that we could bring in, some of the things that's going on outside of work that limit us right now, but aren't permanent. So I don't know, you're going through a divorce or your kids are going through a big time in their education and you're a little bit busy right now. You're taking care of an elderly relative, but your kids are going to be leaving home in 2 years, and then so AI could pull all that together and start to put teams and working groups and project teams together based on more than just we need one of these, one of these, and one of these.
Right. And it might say something more like Blaire, based on her current life conditions, might be a great contributor to this team if you expand on this. And then in a couple of years, she'll be able to relocate because her kids will be out of school, blah, blah, blah. Right. And
Yeah.
instead of, like you said, just looking at one metric that maybe they do or do not check that box. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I guess tell me if you agree, or I'd like to maybe dive into this a little bit. But so I think the ability to leverage, and this is what has not been leveraged to me very well, and certainly not very deeply, even beyond in large companies, you've got your critical thinkers are usually in the top positions and everybody else is carrying out orders. Sometimes all the way, I mean, even at a VP level, right? It's like, I've heard it time and time again, just run the playbook, right? The playbook's established, just run it. So, you know, we've got to start changing the run the playbook mentality to where, yes, there's times to run a play, right? Because we've agreed on it and it needs to be done right now. But critical thinking to me is now, I just had a meeting with some members on our team that we talked about this, and the analogy I was using, and I just kind of made it up on the spot, but I was like, You need to start thinking more like an architect and less like a construction worker. Like, how do we start looking at, instead of saying, oh, I can carry out this part of a process, the better question would be, what's broken about the process, right? That's a more valuable way of thinking to the organization, and therefore for your own value to the organization, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'd love to pick up on there. So the first is this run the play thing. So what happens right now in most organizations, to one extent or another, is that the people at top demand information from the people at lower levels, coming right from the bottom. So people right at ground level have to feed information up through the levels of the hierarchy so that the people at the top can know what's going on, make decisions, and then pass those decisions back down to the people who will have to implement. One of the things that I think needs to happen is the complete reverse of that process. In other words, the people who will have to implement will be the decision makers. At whatever level that decision is made, we decide which decisions should be made where. They decide that this should sit with me because I'm the one that has to implement. I will be the decision maker, even if I'm the person at the checkout at the supermarket, or I'm the person on the production line. I should make that decision because I'm the one that has to implement it. And then the layers of hierarchy, if we have hierarchy, they ask, what can I share with you based on what I see from where I am that will enable you to make a really good decision? So the information flow is downwards rather than up. Now, some decisions would sit at the most senior level because from their perspective, what they have to implement is some of the more holistic stuff across the whole organization. And there are lots of moving parts, and those decisions maybe sit with them. But ultimately, it's a push information down. And this is where the trust thing comes in, because right now leaders are saying, well, we wouldn't want to put that on people. They can't cope. They wouldn't be able to cope with this information. It would be overwhelming to them. Well, how do we know? I mean, without the information, people at the top make the decisions, and they don't have good information either, because what they have is a sort of diluted and made very pretty
Right.
version of reality that bears no resemblance to reality, of course. And when it gets its way back down and the person has to implement, they say, well, this isn't going to work,
Right.
because they know what's going to work and what's not, and it's not this. So that's the first piece. And the second piece, really important that you said, the way I describe it is, instead of trying to address presenting issues, we look systemically. So what normally happens is, it happens even to me, I'll be invited into an organization and they'll say, oh, can you help us with, I don't know. I mean, sometimes something as basic as presenting skills. We've seen you speak. We like the way you speak on stage. Can you come and do some presenting skills? Well, no, because that's literally a presenting issue. That's the tip of the iceberg of something. What's actually going on? When I find out what's going on, it's something like, well, we've got these junior people, and they get very nervous in front of our clients, and they defer to the more senior of our colleagues in the room. Well, that's not a presenting skills issue.
Right.
That is something to do with the culture of the organization, how power is distributed, how people are treated when they make
Yeah,
mistakes.
it's like trust, fear of making a
It's a
mistake, fear of
trust, a fear
screwing
of
up.
failure thing,
Yeah.
risk aversion. It's a whole load of things. It might even be the way we contract with clients, the promises we make to clients, which might be unrealistic. And we may need to change the nature of the relationship with clients. So I'm interested in what's at core, because if we can deal with what's at core, we probably knock off like 20 presenting issues all at once.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the kind of thinking that we need, is to go to where are the tensions in our organization? Let's go towards those rather than just dealing with stuff as it pops up.
I think to your point too, when push certain decisions down to the front, and what I was thinking of, obviously some say senior, like you said. So let's think of a department store, right? Let's say that department store needs a lease on another building. Well, the clerk at the front isn't going to decide that they're going to lease a new building. We get that. but a customer comes in with a return. I mean, how frustrating is it when you come in and the person that probably is empathizing with you to some degree, but their hands are tied by, corporate red tape and what they've been told to do and what they can't do and what's on page 13 of the manual, even though the right thing is just to take care of the problem. They know it, you know it. Ultimately, the person that made the dumb manual to begin with probably knows it too. They've just got it backward, right? And so I think probably looking at all stages of a process, like you're saying, and deciding who should the buck stop with here, and if we trust our people, can we just trust them to make good decisions? And if they make mistakes, can that just be a coachable moment rather than a you're in trouble kind of moment, right?
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if, you ran, I mean, ringing customer service is a very frustrating situation generally. Can you imagine a scenario where you would call and someone would not say to you, I need to talk to my manager about that.
Right.
If they could say, listen, I can hear what's happened. This isn't the sort of business that we run here. Let me just take care of that. And actually, there's a company here. It's called Lakeland. It's a high street store and also an online. You can buy online, and they have all sorts of kitchen products, all kinds of fun stuff for organizing your larder, all that kind of stuff. And they're wonderful. And years ago, my mum, she had a blender of some kind that she had got from this company, and a piece of it had broken. And she went into the store and she said, "This is broken. I have had it for quite a long time." I mean, I think she'd had it for like 10 years or
Oh,
something.
wow. Yeah.
They gave her a replacement, just gave her a replacement, which she then took home. And then she remembered she hadn't actually bought it at Lakeland. She bought it somewhere else. And I thought from that, I mean, she was already a fan, but whenever the catalog would come through, she would always buy
Yeah.
because she loved them so much for the completely pain-free return process of something she hadn't even bought in that store. No one even asked. They were just like, of course we can help you.
Right.
And then she was a lifelong customer,
Yeah.
you know.
From that.
So what did they make from her as a result of just giving her, a new blade for her blender?
Right. Right.
Hundreds of that, probably thousands of pounds.
So much. I know we haven't dived in much directly into the book, even though we're talking about concepts that are in the book. Where did the title come from? Because I love it. Where did that come from? And yeah, talk to me a little bit about, what are you trying to accomplish, I think, ultimately with the book?
Yeah. So it's actually from a quote from the superhero film Kick-Ass 2.
Okay.
The quote is, "There's no room for punks in suits, just real heroes who can really kick ass."
Okay.
But I think we do need a few
Punks and
punks in
suits.
suits, right?
Sure. I
So
like it.
so that's why it's called Punks in Suits. I think we need leaders who are willing to reveal that bit of edge, the punk, especially when we're talking to Gen X leaders,
Right.
the punks that we were or that we aspire to be in the 70s are still in there somewhere.
Right.
And we could let that out before we retire and, go to the golf course. So that's the title. In terms of what I'm trying to do, I'm not providing a lot of answers to be honest, because I think this is an ever-changing situation. There aren't any right answers. We're inventing a whole new way of operating and new way of utilizing people and machines. So who knows how it's going to end up, but I'm encouraging leaders to ask some important questions about themselves and about the ways that their old-fashioned ideas are getting in the way of them getting the best out of themselves and their people. And I'm also challenging them to leave their organizations and ideally the world in a better place than they found it. There's an analogy. A client of mine he'd had quite a lot of bereavement in his family over the previous year or two. And he said, they say that when you're on your deathbed, you come face to face with who you could have been in your life. And that was, I mean, it's very sobering, right? To think of yourself lying there and thinking, oh no, I realize now the ways that I was that I wasn't brave, that I backed away, that I missed what it could have been, missed out on what it could have been. We decided to use that, but to shift it. He was coming up to retirement. And the question was, when you hand in your laptop on the last day of your working life, you'll come face to face with who you could have been in your career. How do you want to feel in that moment? Do you want to feel like you kind of kept under the radar, you played the game, you were very, very good at it, you did all the politics, you got ahead, you made some decent money, maybe you made a bit of a difference, but ultimately you were a compliant member of the machine.
You were a cog in the wheel.
You
Yeah.
were a cog, right? Or do you want to kind of skid out of the door, having ruffled quite a few feathers and had some really difficult conversations and made your mark and spoken your truth and sometimes even made things better and leave the organization and the people in it and the community that is served by that organization better as a result of your contribution, of your sacrifice that you made to do the hours and to have the hard conversations and to push on staff, and which do you want to be? And I'm challenging any reader, and the audiobook's out soon, so any listener, to go for the latter.
I agree. And I'll tell you, to me, there's a responsibility. Like if you're in a leadership position, I don't care if you're leading a couple of people or a large organization. Didn't you? I guess I'm asking as a question of the audience: is didn't you, when you had aspirations of moving into leadership? Because I know when I had aspirations of moving into leadership, it wasn't like I want to be the boss and make more money. It was I can make a difference, right? I can there are some things that I think should maybe be done differently, or there's some things that I think maybe I could help with, or whatever that is. And then how did we forget that? Like there's to me a real obligation. I don't understand it with um listen, nothing wrong with being a billionaire in our society, but why isn't there more um I sort of like what the Gates Foundation did, and I don't know if Melinda Gates started it or what, but the pact of these billionaires that are going to donate a large percentage of their wealth, which I thought was really cool. But I mean, why wouldn't that just be more normal, right? Why, if someone's elected to a political office, wouldn't they do everything they could do to support the people that got them there? But it does kind of seem like from I don't know how society's wired or whatever, and I don't want to make that a cop out for everybody, but it seems that people have big aspirations until they get sort of halfway where they're going, and then they get protective of not losing what they've gained, right? Instead of
Yeah.
remembering where they came from and why they're there in the first place.
Yeah, and that's part of the that I don't want to sound like a sort of conspiracy theorist, but I think that organizations intentionally trap people in that.
Sure.
It's very difficult to go from, I mean, just let's say, when you started in your career, you were earning $30,000 or whatever, and then, you end your career earning
Right.
$500,000. Well, the house you live in requires you to earn $500,000. I
Right.
mean, you can't give it away. It costs that much just to live there.
It's
Um, and
easier to be idealistic at 30K than it is
that's
at
right.
500,
That's
right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And we get used to nice things, and
Yeah.
the sort of, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we get a bit stuck about halfway up on status and
Mm-hmm.
proving our worth, and impressing our friends and neighbors. And unless something jogs us into remembering that there is something above that, that is this self-actualization, sense of purpose, meaning, giving back, making the world a better place. And unless something jogs us into that, it's really easy to forget about it. And actually, in my experience, a lot of leaders who make that transition to trying to do something better have had a breakdown. So they got everything they wanted.
Yep.
It blew up in their faces.
Yep.
And then they were forced to look in the mirror, and they decided to take a different path and to do something different. And unfortunately, sometimes it does take that break or breakdown or horrific story in the news about what you got up to when you worked in the organization, whatever it might be, for people to look in the mirror. I would rather they didn't have to. I
Right.
would rather instead that they took a minute to look into the eyes of their children or their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren to come and think, I'm leaving a legacy for them. What is the legacy that I want to leave? And bring those future generations either literally or metaphorically into their thinking. Because, you don't need me to tell you that there's a bit of a mess coming with our planet. And it really is now or never that we have to come face to face with what we're leaving for these generations. And not just in terms of climate or whatever, in terms of the culture, in terms of the world, in terms of the moral values that we're setting up. And we can't blame the kids. We're the ones that created this world.
Yeah, you just described. I went through that. I went through owning a business, going into the corporate world, having success there, leaving there, starting another business, and then just kind of going, what, it was supposed to be a lot better than this. I mean, making this kind of money, having this kind of house, having this family, why doesn't it feel better? And by then um, well, I didn't know it, but I was an alcoholic. I was drinking too much. I was constantly in this frequency of discomfort, basically, right? Nothing's working. High degree of certainty needed, high degree of significance that was needed, right? And yeah, and I found that, and I've talked to so many people. You find a lot of high net worth people like that, like that, because they were chasing that one thing, right? They made money or success or power their god, and if I just get this, it'll all be good. I'll be accepted, I'll be loved, I'll be whatever. And it's like you forgot a lot of stuff along the way, right? And it's like
Yeah.
and I've found that with almost everybody I've ever talked to that I've seen come full circle on this, or maybe if they never left this circle, like you're saying, maybe they didn't have to go the hard route, it's because they found a way to link their own significance to the contribution and service to others, whatever that is, whether that's being a strong leader in your job, whether that's, whatever it is, it always involved other people, right? It was never a solo activity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, I think just I don't know if this is a relevant point. It's never really occurred to me before. So it just occurred to me based on what you said. As a midlife menopausal woman, there is a thing that happens to a lot of us where we do lose our kind of, play nice capabilities. It's all the hormones leaving our body, and we go from being a bit more accepting and a bit more kind of, okay, well, I don't like conflict and all that. Quite a lot of us become a bit ragey, a bit angry, and that for women can be a trigger for, I'm not going to take this anymore. I need to make a difference. I need to work differently. I need to do a different kind of role. I need to be part of my community in a different way. I need to leave a legacy. And I'd be really interested to know if a similar thing, I'm not saying all women, obviously, because everyone's having their own journey, but the friends that I talk to, it's an interesting turning point in our lives where we do become more political and more ragey and more determined to have a voice.
Right.
And I wonder if something similar happens to men.
I think it's a human issue that is probably might be bigger for women, because especially women of our age, because I think for anyone, when you're promised something, okay, the promise of the American dream. So maybe for a man of our age, it was, okay, you're going to go out, you're going to work hard, you're going to get a job, you're going to make a lot of money, you're going to start a family, and that's life, and it's good, that's a good life, and you'll have a nice house and cars, and your kids will go to college, and that's awesome. And you're like, when you're in your early 20s, you're like, okay, I mean, sign me up, like that's what I'm going to do. And for a woman of that age, it might have been like, well, you got to do all that, and you got to take care of everybody too. And I think for anybody getting to the end of some journey, going like, I did, maybe not the end of it, but to a point in the journey where you're like, I did everything I'm supposed to do, and this is what I get, right?
Right.
And like I said, I think it's maybe um, elevated for women, because I think there's more of an expectation on most women, again, of our age, to raise kids, do this, have a career. I mean, there's a bigger balancing act, I think, but I think the feeling is probably the same. Is
Yeah.
I did my time, I did the
Yeah.
work, and the result is bullshit, and I'm not
Yeah.
happy about it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you're either going to shut down and fade away, or you're going to kind of stand up and fight. And that might be where you know the parts that you talked about like, not wanting to take it, wanting to be more outspoken, et cetera, comes from.
Yeah. That's very interesting to hear it from the man's perspective. And I think there's a lot in that, having been sold that role for you,
Mm,
as the breadwinner, as the backbone of the family that's going to make it all happen, and then maybe finding that it is not as rewarding, and that those things don't mean what you thought they were going to mean,
right,
and there's still time to
right,
change it.
right.
That might be part of that kind of coming to that crossroads moment of thinking, I could, yeah, I don't have to. I'm a big boy now. I don't
Yeah.
have to play this game if I don't want to.
Well, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I've talked to people. If you think about it, and I don't even want to separate gender for what I'm going to say
Mm,
here, because it's so much more aligned now when people are coming out of school and wanting to have careers and stuff like that, right? It's not so lopsided. And for anyone to go out into their 20s and go, I just want to, let's say they came from a lower middle class family or poor family or whatever, but they're like, I need to go make some money right now. And in their 20s, that's their North Star, and they just want to run hard and earn as much as they can. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I think what might be wrong with that is not understanding that you're in that for a particular period of time to get a certain thing done, and that's not a way to spend a life for the next 50 years or a career, right? And I think so I think some of the behaviors are, I think, natural transitions of growing up, male or female. But if we get stuck somewhere that is not fulfilling, like the pursuit only of money or the pursuit only of titles, um, then we're going to have a reckoning of that someday, right? Like, this is very unfulfilling. I mean, even the mental picture I got when you said, when you turn in your laptop, and I was like, God, it just sounds so, it sounds so just, black and white, and there's no color to it. It's over here.
yeah.
I spent 40 years, here's my Dell crappy, you know what I mean? Just
That's right. I don't even
not
get to keep this.
not even a
Yeah.
MacBook. It's just a Dell, and it's over, and
Yeah.
but it kind of is, right? When you leave,
Yeah. Yeah.
you leave, and the business goes on, and you got to be happy with yourself.
Yeah. And just, I do think that the generations behind us do have different expectations as a generation. Again, we're talking about individuals. You can't really,
Yes.
everyone's different, but we are seeing different trends. And I think it's very difficult for some Gen X leaders to understand why the Gen Z intake just don't want to
Do
do
certain
what we
things.
did.
Yeah.
They're just not willing to kill themselves for their work. They want to have rounded lives. They're not going to work in a dysfunctional environment. They don't
Right.
want to be talked to like that. They're not going to do these kind of hours. And And we're sitting around thinking, well, hang on a minute, I did it. Blah, blah, blah. They don't take their work seriously. They don't know how to work, or how do we get them to care about. They care about stuff. They care hugely. They just don't care about this.
But they don't
And
care
so
about
we have to
everything
give
you
them
want
something
them to
to
care about.
care about that they
Right.
could genuinely care about. We
Right.
have to understand what matters to them.
They're actually approaching it smarter because
Yeah.
they're actually looking at you or me, right? The Gen X leader and going, no, I've seen you running that playbook. Um, I just heard you on a podcast talking about how it didn't work out all that well at the end and you had to pivot. I think I'm going to be more conscious about my decisions going in, right? I'm not just going to slave away hour after hour, day after day, which to a weak leader that doesn't want to get to know their people, they just classify as laziness,
Yeah.
right? Millennials are lazy. It's like,
Yeah.
no, they might just be more thought out than we were, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I think we have a huge amount to learn from them, and we should not be scared. Obviously they are young, and
Yeah,
so there's some stuff we know, but there's some stuff they know.
for sure.
And we could tune in and we would become wiser as a result.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a joy. An hour went by really fast, and I don't want to keep you any longer. The book is Punks in Suits from Blaire Palmer. You can get it on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And we'll put a link as well in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us, Blaire.
Thank you so much.
All right. Nice to meet you.